sister standing outside this lady's house, and I always remember because they're singing Christmas carols, and I always thought the expression on her face was slightly odd, but you tell me what you think anyway. So let's take a look through. Now we can tell that this is an old Ladybird book because it's got this loose leaf. Now I'm not an expert in these vintage books, but the more I've looked at them, these seem to be the older or the oldest versions. So I like to see if there's a date inside. Now this is obviously a second-hand book, and it says that it used to belong to King's School, Gloucester Library, or King's School Library in Gloucester. And the date on it is 1964, printed in England. So it is an old book. So let's have a look. Now, there's quite a lot of pages, and the writing's quite small, so we may have to make a couple of videos, but we'll start anyway. Now, isn't that a lovely picture? It says, "A Christmas Scene in England." There we go. Every year in December we celebrate the birthday of Jesus Christ, by whose teachings all Christians try to live. That is why we call this time Christmas, because we celebrate the Mass or church service for Christ. Sometimes, if we are lazy, we may write Xmas. You know, my mother used to tell me off for writing Xmas. I never really understood why, but I kind of get it, I guess. The X stands for the Greek letter which in Greece is the first letter of Christ's name and frequently used there as a holy symbol. Now if I'd known that, I could have told my mother. At Christmas we remember that Christ taught us to love one another. We send cards and give presents to friends and relatives, and especially think of those less fortunate than ourselves. We watch and take part in nativity plays and carol services. We decorate our churches, chapels, schools and homes with green leaves, fir trees, paper decorations, candles and colourful electric lights. We eat and drink good things and generally have a happy time. Have you ever wondered why you hang up holly and not privet leaves? Why you have good things to eat, and why it is that you get lots of presents even though it is not your birthday? This book will tell you why we do these things at Christmas. Now, just a bit of a disclaimer for you before we carry on. I'm not religious myself. I was brought up to be religious, but it's something that I decided not to continue with as I got older. Okay, Christmas Day. Jesus was born nearly 2,000 years ago, long before accurate records were kept or birth certificates given, so nobody most places occasions for generally having a good time. The Christians often took part in them, for although they did not believe in a sun god, they wanted to take part in the fun and joy. But these festivals were not always happy occasions, for in some places animals were sacrificed. In the year 601 AD, Pope Gregory ordered Christians to no longer offer beasts to devils, but to worship God by feasting. As more and more people became Christians, they thought of Jesus as a bringer of happiness, and so they thought of him rather than of the sun at festival times. But this change of thinking took place very slowly. In the 4th century, when the Romans adopted Christianity, they celebrated the birth of Christ with great processions to church on Christmas morning. The first we learn of Christmas in England was in 521 AD, when King Arthur went to York Minster to remember Christ's birthday after he had won a great battle against the Danes. And here we have Christmas morning in Rome. The second 1,000 years of Christmas. In the Middle Ages, Christmas was a very jolly time. Great feasts were held, and the stern lords of the castles gave up their places to the lords of misrule, whose job it was to play jokes on people and keep everybody merry. When Oliver Cromwell was Lord Protector of England, and there was no king, the Puritan Parliament made laws so that people would think of Christmas only as a solemn time. Fun and feasting were forbidden, because the Puritans said that such merrymaking had more to do with pagan sun worship than with Christ's birth. They did not believe that people could worship God by having a good time. To be fair to the Puritans, we must remember that people often behaved so badly at Christmas that they used the festival as an excuse to be hooligans. Okay. Can I just also say, please remember this was written 56 years ago. Over half a century ago. Okay. You can imagine how many people hated the stern Puritan Christmas, and how great was the rejoicing when Charles II became king and allowed the old traditions again. The Scots disapproved of Charles II and kept to the Puritan ways. This is why Christmas in Scotland is not the festival that it is in England. Well, I don't know. That's debatable, really, isn't This is a custom which came from Italy, and like many Christmas customs, began even before Jesus was born. For at the Roman winter festivals, clay dolls were sold in the streets of Rome to be given as presents. When many Romans became Christians, they probably bought dolls which looked like Mary, Joseph, Jesus, and other people of the Nativity story, and so in time dolls were specially made to look like these people. The most famous of cribs was that of St. Francis of Assisi, the good saint who was so kind to animals. He wanted people to understand how hard it was to live in a poor manger. He arranged to have a real live scene with people and a real ox and ass. This took place in northern Italy at Gracia in 1224 AD, and was followed by a service in which the saint preached of the birth of a poor king. So this says Italian children making the crib. Nativity plays. Today, most of us look forward to two types of play at Christmas time: a serious nativity play and a light-hearted pantomime or circus. These two types of entertainment show us how our Christmas is both serious and gay. Throughout history, watching plays has always been popular at holiday or festival times. Before people could read, watching plays was one of the few ways of learning. The people of the Middle Ages looked forward to watching plays made up from Bible stories. At first, these miracle plays, as they are called, were written by the priests and acted by their congregations. The nativity stories in these early plays are very similar to the plays that are performed in most schools today before the Christmas holidays. Later, in the Middle Ages, these Bible plays were performed by ordinary people in the town marketplaces. These plays were acted on pageants, which were large carts that could be drawn by horses from one place to another. As these plays were no longer played in church, they included amusing scenes which would have not been suitable in church. And this is people watching a miracle play. Carols. A carol is a hymn which is full of joy and happiness. The word comes from the French carol, which was a dance, and long ago in England this word meant a dance used to celebrate the shortest day of the year. An early history book tells that about 100 years after the death of Jesus, the Pope wanted people to sing in memory of the birth of Jesus, but the first Christian hymns were not popular because they were sung in Latin, and only the priests could sing and understand them. It was at St. Francis's crib at Gracia that carols were first sung in the language that ordinary folk could understand. The actors at Gracia composed carols to sing with the play. When the service was over, the singers strolled home singing, and so street caroling began. This singing of carols in words that could easily be understood spread to other lands. In England, carols were sung by minstrels in the halls of the great lords, and later by street singers. And so today this tradition is carried on in house-to-house caroling by groups of children and church choirs. And here we have the children from the front cover and the lady with the slightly odd look on her face. is Christdawn. At one time, the tree itself was used in the homes and churches of North Americans and was called the holly tree. It seems likely that the English word holly may have come from the word holy. It is a holy tree because it should remind us of the death of Jesus. The prickly leaves are like the thorns used in the crown of thorns that Jesus was forced to wear on Good Friday. The red berries are to remind us of the drops of blood that came when the thorns pierced his flesh. Sometimes at Christmas time you will see a holly wreath fastened to a door or window. This is an old American custom. Americans living in our country have hung holly wreaths on their doors as they would do in America. Many British people have liked the idea and copied it. We always copy everything. It says a holly wreath on a door, an old American custom. Mistletoe. There is a very old northern legend which explains why we hang up mistletoe at Christmas. Balder, the sun god, was so fine and great that the other gods promised never to hurt him. They placed a spell on everything to take care of him. Water would not drown him, nor could arrows, swords, and poisons kill him. When the gods were laying their spells, they forgot the mistletoe. Now Loki, the god of evil, found this out and made a sharp arrow out of a mistletoe branch. He put the arrow into the hands of the blind god, Hoda, and guided Hoda's hand so that the arrow struck Balder. Balder was killed, but the other gods brought him back to life again. Christians decorated only with evergreens. When Italians first made their cribs, any coloured cloth or paper was used that would make the cribs more attractive. In a similar way, people decorating with evergreens added coloured ribbons and pictures. From this early use of these materials has gradually grown a great industry in decorations, from paper streamers to delicate glass ornaments. It is only in the last 100 years or so that these decorations have been used to any great extent. This was partly because people left the countryside to live in towns. It was not always possible to go out and pick evergreens, and so coloured paper was sometimes used instead. Gifts. At festival times, ancient people used to give gifts. In northern countries, the gods Woden and Odin were believed to give special gifts. In the days when the Romans worshipped many gods and goddesses, they went at the winter festival to the grove of the goddess Strenia and cut down branches of the trees to give as presents. Later, the Romans gave more expensive presents at their New Year festival. When they conquered other countries, they took with them many customs, and this giving of presents at New Year was one of these customs. This is why in most countries presents are not given on Christmas Day, but on New Year's Day. These presents have really nothing to do with Christ's birthday. It is only in English-speaking and German-speaking countries that present giving has been brought forward from New Year's Day to Christmas Day. The people of these countries use their gifts to remember the gifts given by the wise men to Jesus. Christmas cards. Unlike most traditions of Christmas, the habit of sending cards at Christmas time is only about 100 years old. In the same way that the Christmas present took the place of the New Year gift, the Christmas card began to take the place of the New Year card. New Year cards, although only containing word greetings for the new year, often showed a picture of the baby Jesus. One of the first known is a beautiful design showing the baby Jesus on a cloud. This card was printed in 1467 AD and can be seen at the British Museum. It seems that New Year cards became popular with the discovery of the printing press. The pictures on these cards show that the senders were remembering the birth of Jesus, although the cards had no Christmas message. The first cards with Christmas greetings on them were not unlike birthday cards with pictures of animals, flowers, children, and summer scenes. It was not until 1900 AD that cards from Germany with holly, snow scenes, and nativity scenes became popular. And here are a few Victorian New Year and Christmas cards. Santa Claus. Children of many European countries used to find presents left for them by the god Saint Nicholas. In North America, the children of European settlers were left gifts by someone who was as kind as Saint Nicholas. He was called Santa Claus. Saint Nicholas used to ride from Spain on a horse and put presents in clogs and wooden shoes. North American children believed that Santa Claus had to travel from the North Pole over much snow Germans have a saying for when a person is very busy. They say that he has more to do than the ovens in England at Christmas. We have always eaten a great deal at Christmas, but now we eat little compared with the amount of food that was eaten in the castles and manor houses during the Middle Ages. Enormous feasts were prepared. These often began with a boar's head, richly decorated, being ceremoniously carried to the high table. When the Puritans ruled our country, feasting was one of the customs they stopped. Parliament ordered that people fasted, not feasted on Christmas Day. This, as you can imagine, was not at all popular, so when the country once more had a king, there was great rejoicing when feasting was again encouraged, but people never prepared quite as much as in the days before the Puritan Parliament. Nevertheless, we still eat well, often too well, at Christmas. This is a Christmas dinner in Tudor England. From boar's head to turkey. In some homes, pork has always been eaten as the main meat of the Christmas dinner. This is probably because in olden days, pigs were killed late in November, when they had grown fat on the acorns and other nuts, which were the only food they could find in the forests. By Christmas, they were ready to be eaten, and the feast began with the head of the animal. After the pork would come roast peacock. The bird was expertly cooked and looked very fine, with its tail and other feathers replaced for decoration. Turkeys first came from America, and these birds were unknown in England before sailors returned from the New World. An Englishman, William Strickland, first brought the birds here in the first half of the 16th century, and by the end of that century, turkeys were being served at table. Early in the 17th century, they had replaced the peacock in the Christmas dinner. Plum pudding and mince pies. Plum pudding is so called because in days gone by, prunes, which are dried plums, were used in the making of the Christmas pudding. Today we use currants, raisins and sultanas instead of prunes, but the other ingredients, suet, breadcrumbs, eggs and spices, are the same as they always have been. Mince pies were once called mutton pies because finely chopped or minced mutton was one of the main ingredients. Like the plum pudding, the remaining ingredients were much the same as those we use today. Although we no longer use meat, we still add shredded suet, which is animal fat, in the making of both mince pies and plum puddings. Mince pies used to be oval or cradle-shaped and not round as they are today. One book tells us that this was to remind people of the manger in which Jesus was born, and that the pies were to be eaten quietly as people thought about the infant Jesus. This is possibly why people today make a silent wish when they take their first bite, and why others consider it unlucky to cut a mince pie. And this is an illustration of making plum puddings in Victorian England. Boxing Day. Boxing Day is really St. Stephen's Day. St. Stephen was the first to die for preaching about Jesus. Therefore, he has the honour of having his day next to Christ's birthday. In many churches today, you will see boxes in which to put money for poor people. Years ago, this was much more common than it is now, because there is the time when friends meet to welcome the coming year. In most countries it is celebrated much more than is Christmas. In Scotland particularly, New Year's Eve, which the Scots call Hogmanay, is the most important festival of the year. It is a worldwide custom for a man or boy to enter the house after midnight to wish all inside a happy new year. In Scotland, this person is called the first footer. The first footer in some places must be dog, and in other places he must be fur. In most places he must not enter empty-handed, and it is considered lucky if he carries a small piece of coal. A woman first footer is thought to be unlucky. That's not very nice, is it? New Year's Day. New Year's Day has not always been the 1st of January. Thousands of years ago, the ancient Egyptian New Year was in the middle of June, when the river Nile overflowed its banks. Even today, the New Year of the Jews and Hindus is not when we celebrate it. In Christian countries, New Year has been celebrated on many different days. When Pope Gregory VIII in 1582 caused the making of the calendar, which we use today, January the 1st was made New Year's Day, because it had been so in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, this day was one given over to the worship of the god Janus, from which we get the name of the month. Janus was the god of beginnings and endings. He had two faces. One looked backward at the old year, and the other looked forward to what would happen in the coming year. This is how we all think at New Year. Most people look back at their own mistakes and make New Year resolutions in which they promise not to make the same mistakes again. And that's the Roman god. Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night is the last day of Christmas. Nowadays, it is the day on which we take down the decorations. Some people still celebrate with Twelfth Night parties. As its name tells us, it is the 6th of January, just 12 days after Christmas Day. This day is the feast of the Epiphany, which is remembered as the day on which the wise men were guided by the star to the stable at Bethlehem. In northern France, children go out on Epiphany Eve to meet the three kings on the roadway. In days of old, these 12 days were all spent in feasting, singing, dancing, playing games and watching actors. In some places, Christmas went on looks fairly old, I suppose. It's by somebody called George Boudet. I guess that's how you pronounce his name. And it's called The Story of the Christmas Card. And it's a little hardback book. It's about the same size as one of the Ladybird books that I've been reading to you. But it isn't a Ladybird book. I thought it was actually when I first picked it up. Now inside there's a little label. It says greetings to from. So it was obviously designed as a present for somebody, but it looks as though nobody received it because this bit wasn't filled in. So maybe I should fill it in and it should be for me. Now on the left here we've got, which must be, this is an older Victorian animated Christmas card, an illustration of one. And then we can see that the book was published in Longacre, London, by Oddham's Press Limited. Now I wonder if there's a date. I don't think there is. This is one on the back. So we might find one. So this illustration here, it says, instead of the personal call customary on New Year's Day, J.A. Borner sent this card in 1812, showing his cloak caught in a doorway to give explanation of his absence. He designed and etched it himself at a time when the sending of greeting cards was not yet general practice. So I know nothing really about the history of the Christmas card, so I think this could be quite interesting. Let's start the story of the Christmas card. Whether the old custom of sending greetings cards at Christmas is a good or a bad habit is to some debatable. Ever since the first Christmas card appeared in 1843, objections for one reason or another to these seasonal missives have been made. Christmastide now begins with the arrival in the letterbox of the first Christmas card for the year, and thanks to the Postmaster General's reiterated appeals to post early for Christmas, the season seems to be lengthening year by year, at least in this respect. The little pasteboard and folder, with its picture and sentiment, has never claimed to be more than an expression of a kindly thought, conveying the sender's goodwill and greeting to the recipient, a token, the exchange of which is not infrequently the only manifestation that a feeling of friendship continues despite years of physical separation, or, in the case of new acquaintance, that the relationship is blossoming into friendship. Let's move my coffee. This function is an unchanging quality of the Christmas card. In fact, the essential in it, whatever its size or construction, simple or complicated, artistic or humorous, modest or ambitious, and however it is sent or delivered according to the tastes and conveyances of the age, it is equally true that these unconsidered trifles, as one of their first designers called them, even more faithfully mirror fashion in vision and thought, and in the way of life, that some of the more dignified objects of art of successive periods. Let's have a look at the illustrations here. At one time, this design, etched by W.M. Egley, was thought older than the card on page 5. Actually, it dates from 1848. And then this one here, designed at the suggestion of Sir Henry Cole, recipient of the card. The neat little design, together with two side panels of the drawing illustrating the traditional Christmas charities, the feeding of the hungry and the clothing of the naked, would hardly seem to provoke a campaign against intemperance today. On the contrary, the design brings back to our mind the rather controlled atmosphere of the well-to-do upper middle-class family circle of the 1840s, and the gentle style of the well-established artist John Calcutt Horsley, an R.A., who actually designed the card on the initiative of Henry, later Sir Henry Cole, an ardent improver of public taste and art education, the first director of what is now the Victoria and Albert Museum, South Kensington. In addition to his portrait on the staircase of Burlington House and his composition in the House of Lords, Horsley is, amongst artists, still remembered for his own famous campaign against nudity, or rather against the use by artists of models in the nude. His crusade gained for him amongst his friends in the 1880s the epithet Ornans, Clothes Horsley. Punch is Blanche in one of her favourite dispatches from Broadlands in the early 1900s. Declares, "We all vote Christmas a bore and a back number," and goes on to deprecate the absurd habit of Christmas cards and presents, adding, "I refer of course to those one has to give." So, not those that one has to receive. Now let's go back and look at this picture. I love that picture. It's maybe a little bit scary, but it's got a bit of a Hobbit look about it, I think. So it says, "On this early British card, designed by Kenny Meadows and engraved by W. Jane Linton, the jolly Falstaffian character is accompanied by a greeting in German, a curious contrast with the atmosphere of merry England." Does anybody know what this says? If you do know, let me know in the comments. is it a pure coincidence that it happened during the second half of the reign of Queen Victoria when, after many previous and unrelated attempts in England, Scotland and on the continent, it developed into the formidable industry and nationwide trade it became from the late 1870s. The factors contributing to the rapid rise in popularity of the Christmas card and the whys and wherefores of its origin in Britain could not be explored in a brief survey. Study of the history of the Christmas card proves that the tradition of exchanging charms or small tokens of good luck goes back to very ancient times, in fact to ages long before the traditional feasts on or around the winter solstice assumed our Christian significance, and the seasonal festivities previously held to celebrate the end of the barren winter months. The lengthening of daylight and the promise of spring and the coming new year were transformed into Christmastide, the anniversary of the birth of Christ. Right, let's look at this card first before we turn the page. So there is a very strange looking Father Christmas here holding a Christmas tree, and then there's these children down here. This one is standing on his head. This looks a bit Alice in Wonderland. And it says, "Hurrah for the jolly Christmas tree, and welcome, yes, thrice welcome, he who bears this type of mirth and glee, this emblem of felicity." In the 1860s, the Christmas tree and Santa Claus were still rather novel. In this design, Father Christmas is set against a gold ground and wears a red jacket and blue trousers. So, inscribed tokens of the ancient Egyptians, the strenai of the Romans, have been excavated in Numbers, while examples of the first printed pictorial cards have survived from the first centuries of European woodcut and copperplate engraving. Amongst them, one delightful design of the infant Christ stepping forward on the calyx of a decorative flower by the great early engraver Master E.S., identified today only by his initials, was engraved in 1466 and is known to have been copied by another important early master, von just as an aside, you have to be so careful with these vintage books. You just sometimes don't know what you're going to come across. And yeah, that was a bit of a shock. Okay, let's carry on. I'll tell you about it sometime. The technical and psychological conditions for the invention of the Christmas card as a large-scale business coincided with the development of the regular and cheap postal services, especially when, after the introduction of the decisive penny post in 1840, for a half-ounce letter, the still cheaper rate, a half-penny for postcards, came into force in 1870. Before these, or at the time when postal charges were not prepaid by the sender, but were collected from the recipient of the letter at rather costly rates calculated by distance, the exchange of greetings cards could not very well have flourished. As a result of the manifold variety of their forerunners, as well as perhaps the even greater diversity of their public, the Victorian Christmas cards are the most varied products imaginable, devised to serve one simple purpose. They vary in size and material, in shape and makeup, and their pictorial embellishment offers not only considerable differences in the styles of the many artists and designers, manufacturers and lithographers who created them, but the overlapping of different styles and treatment on one and the same card. The well-known accumulation of beauty by heaping together any amount of diverse, in themselves pretty things, styles and materials, motifs and patterns, symbols and narratives, as in the Albert Memorial, to quote a survival outside the subject of this book, in the expectation that the result can be greater and more composite beauty, a principle so dear to the Victorians, was bound to be exploited to the full, or more, one might say, in Christmas cards. Right, let's go back a little bit and have a look at these illustrations. That's like a fan effect. That's really pretty. From the 1870s onward, fans bearing finely printed flower decorations, silk ribbons and tassels, and conveying tender messages were used both as Christmas cards and valentines. Oh, you know, if you're interested in the history of greetings cards, there are some fabulous old Valentine's cards at the museum in Whitby, and I mean the Whitby Museum in North Yorkshire is an amazing museum anyway, but they have a whole host of Victorian Valentine's cards and they're just amazing. Anyway, I don't know whether they've got any Christmas cards there, but that's just an aside. It just reminded me of it. Now this one says, when the disc at the bottom of this complex card here of 1872 is turned, different pictures appear in the central panel. Wow, that's clever. Let's have a bit more coffee. Okay. Right, where were we? At the time of cheap and sweated labour, it was relatively inexpensive to amass on a single card pleasures the new year may bring. Look forward to feeding the chickens in spring. And then across on this side, we've got, as depicted on Victorian Christmas cards, children seem to have a resemblance to Alice in Wonderland. That's really strange, isn't it? Because I said that just before. And offer a charming contrast to modern representations of children. Many of these efforts to achieve a multiplied effect of the beautiful, viewed from our modern platform of good art and design, are indeed ridiculous, but some of us who possess a more charitable attitude towards even modest attempts at creating beauty in pastimes and fashions may prefer the adjective pathetic. When seen in perspective and historically, in their less lasting and more modest medium, the Victorian and Edwardian Christmas cards express much the same atmosphere, an equally dated spirit of past decades, as the less ephemeral survivals of the period, quite irrespective of the finer evaluation by their contemporary or modern critics. It is this characteristic period flavour which makes the old Christmas cards, and so many other documents of olden times, so fascinating to us, once we are able to view the relics of another age. With a historical and sociological understanding, or simply with toleration, the otherwise revolting period flavour becomes the key to the charms and attractions of their particular world. There is no proof that any period of human history has been devoid of some beauty and fascination of its own, nor can the Victorian era be an exception to this. Now, up here we have these Greek ladies. It says, on this large card, the dishes represent various virtues, and to avoid misunderstanding are suitably labelled happiness, contentment, amiability, good temper, etc. Let me have a bit more coffee. And then on this side, it says, both cards reproduced on this page come from the same scrapbook that on the right was sent in 1887 for Susan with Edgar's love. This one. The use of fancy edges was then becoming increasingly popular. The card below, sent the next year to Sue from Edgar, suggests both by its inscription and its rather daring humour a slight but definite progress in the wooing of the young man who sent it. By pulling the tab in and out, the pasteboard legs of the lady on the card perform a frantic dance, in a manner probably considered rather piquant even in paper. Seen in action, the static upper and fast-moving lower parts of the figure look very comic. That's hilarious. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. I think I'm probably about halfway through, so we'll rejoin this book about the history of the Christmas card in another video. I'm just going to pop this little Merry Christmas tag, which seemed appropriate, as a bookmark in that page. There we go. Well, thank you so much for joining me at coffee time. This has been Kate at the Library Whispers saying I shall see you very, very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody. This traditional symbols and properties of the old Christmas, which either in fact or volume, or in habit or spirit, are no longer with us. Now on this side, this is a strange one, says safely caged cupids sweeten the dreams of the pretty young lady, in this design by W.F. Yeames, R.A., made in 1881. This was one of the Royal Academy cards by Raphael Tuck. Now is the lady dreaming? Here are the cupids in this cage. I reckon she's probably dreaming and they're trying to wake her up. In doing so, not. Even our modern irony is quite immune from melancholy and vice versa. We enjoy seeing on the Cole Horsley card and on its immediate successor, designed by W.M. Egley a few years later, the huge family parties seated according to age and other Victorian proprieties, the surrounding scenes of Christmas charity, as well as the after-dinner convivialities, the central Harlequin and Columbine figures, the Sir Roger de Coverley, the Punch and Judy show, skating adventures, and the waits on the latter card, and on many others which followed. Now on this side we have the children's party was an important feature of both Christmas festivities and card designs in the 1880s. This card showing an arrival at a party was made in Germany. This looks like the maid over here. We like to study the smaller and larger Christmas trees pictured on some of these early cards, especially when we recollect that the Christmas tree was only introduced in this country in 1840. Thus, its whole pictorial history of the varying decorations hung on it can be composed from Christmas cards of successive decades, from its candlelit period up to the last electrically lighted huge giants, which, through the kindness of Norway, Christmas puddings, the size of the children who celebrate them, the flocks of turkeys and so on. Now this really quite pretty card, I think. It's nice to see them in colour. It's a design published by I. Prang, the father of American Christmas cards since the year 1876. True to the social conception of the prosperous of the Victorian age, Christmas was the season for charity and some of the other suitable virtues on the dishes are shown on page 22, towards the poor and destitute of the community. The poor and their underclad and overworked children, errand boys, crossing sweepers, etc., are accordingly not absent from Victorian Christmas cards. On the contrary, the charity motif appears already on the side panels of the Cole, Horsley and the Egley designs, while the later commercially marketed we'll come back to these in a minute. Cards frequently picture the poor enjoying their own simple pleasures, or the hot soup and bread given to them in the rather idyllic manner of the genre paintings of the time. Right, let's just go back to these. Aren't these gorgeous in colour? Wow. So this one is dating from about 1870. These Christmas cards derive their bright colours and naive decorative patterns from the popular taste of the period. Similar motifs were to be found in the traditional decorations of barges, gypsy caravans, and in Staffordshire and Sunderland chinaware. Really nice. And here we have the very decorative card above, was designed for Christmas 1875 by Walter Crane. That one. And the half pathetic, half comic scene below is on a card dating from about 1884. Then on this side we have the application of actual silk and satin, velvet and lace, tinsel and sparkling glass to the original pasteboard was thought to add to the charm of Victorian Christmas cards. The little boy here was given clothes of real velvet and silk. The bunch of roses on the lace paper can be lifted, and beneath is hidden the greeting text. But this does not only but seldom stuck into respectable family scrapbooks of Christmas cards. Well, I wonder why. Now, top here we have members of the royal family, like millions of others, enjoy exchanging greetings. This ingenious mechanical card was given to Queen Mary in the early 1870s by Her Majesty's mother. When squeezed, it chirps like a real bird. And at the top here we have the Victorians loved comic and trick cards. Of those shown on this page, the one below shows two faces which appear in different moods if the card is looked at upside down. I will check that in a minute. The card above at first sight is only a picture of a winter landscape, but the design includes a striking face of Father Christmas, which is revealed when looked at sideways. Okay, oh, I can see it. So, look at that card, and then as I turn it sideways, yeah, can you see? There's the eyes, nose, mouth, and the beard, Father Christmas. Now this bottom one, so you can see the faces, smiling, turn it upside down. You can see the faces are completely different. Now here we have a card with the King and Queen on of the time. Victorian Christmas cards seldom proclaimed politics or ostentatious patriotism even in wartime. However, when the long reign ended, the new reign was loyally greeted. It says, to wish you every happiness under the old flag and the new reign. And then on this side, a lady sitting on top of a big Christmas pudding, plum pudding. It says, Xmas Cheero. The old-fashioned Christmas pudding and the modern girl seated on it offer a characteristic taste of the good cheer of the Edwardian period. A popular recorder of bird songs pointed out recently how the song of the same kind of bird differs in England and Germany, or north of the border in Scotland. One gets a similarly pleasant and interesting experience when looking through old Christmas cards, picturing Robin Redbreast and the other feathered favourites, which, together with flowers and animals of every kind, and even insects, appear again and again on them from the early 1860s to the present day. But in common with all the thousands of other popular Christmas card subjects, how different these little robins are from each other, according to the skill or style of the draftsman. Now down here we have a couple of Christmas tales. With a real kick in them is the title of this jolly modern trick card published by A.M. Davis and Company, London. So this is a horse, I think, or a donkey. And then on this side, this says Regent's Park. Seems to be lots of animals up here. I think this maybe represents London Zoo in Regent's Park, at the top of Regent's Park. The pleasures of a famous London park are designed by Ursula Bernstein-Stingle, a popular artist of Christmas cards published by the Favel Press between the two world wars. There's a boating lake and children playing. So the process of the reproduction of the drawing and the almost second nature to those who lived generations before us, but were often overlooked by chroniclers of the more prominent events of the day, and the cards of today will be old tomorrow. That's true. So this one is the new revival of wood engraving has inspired a number of attractive cards, like this wintry landscape by Gwendolyn Ravarat. Ari. Almost looks slightly scary actually, that scene. And here we have a Merry Christmas Peel. Characteristic of the beginning of the 20th century is this bird and bell card, one of many designed and executed by E.M. Atkins and his wife. It is in fact difficult sharply to divide the old from the new Christmas cards. To the elderly amongst us, an old Christmas card would be synonymous with a mid-Victorian, or at the latest a 19th century card, whereas to the youngsters of the present generation, an Edwardian or even First World War Christmas card would have the aura of age around it. Printing techniques have progressed in many directions since the early chromolithographs. In early Edwardian days, photography began to be more and more popular, both as the illustration of the Christmas card and even more as the technique of the reproduction of its design, while a revival of creative wood engravings characterised one section of high-class Christmas cards during and between the two world wars. Transparent cellophanes and plastics have gradually seeped into the Christmas card production, but parallel with the use of these modern materials, frosting and jewelling of designs, which appeared first in 1867, the use of silk and other fabrics or devices which have never quite fallen out of fashion and are today enjoying a new vogue, especially in the highly perfected mass productions of America. So let's just go back and see what we have here. So these cards here, I mean this looks like a photograph. Cards of the First World War. That on the left was sent home to England from France for Christmas 1917, and the card on the right is a French one of the same period. And then here, cards of the Second World War. Aircrafts from the fronts were adapted as Christmas cards on the left. On the right, a card from a series issued by Raphael Tuck plays on a comic aspect of service life by declaring the rubbish collector to be on His Majesty's service. And then down here we have a contemporary card by Nan Reed using stuck-on tinsel and various cut-out textures, retaining thus both surrealist and Victorian principles of design. And this one is the celebrated American designer S. Steinberg combines in this card Santa Claus and the Christmas tree. In his characteristic style, note the change from the Victorian Father Christmas and his tree shown on page 11. So, judging from the experience of the study of Christmas cards surviving from generations ago, we can be sure that our modern Christmas cards will, 100 years hence, or even less, be signed by George Boudet for Christmas 1937. Now, George Boudet is the author of this book. Then we've got various acknowledgements by the author. And there we go. So that's all the book read and finished. I hope you enjoyed this little vintage book, Story of the Christmas Card. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers saying, I shall see you very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody. Well, it's Christmas Eve, so I thought I would read this chapter about Christmas Eve for you from this lovely 12 Days of Christmas vintage book. It's only a very short chapter, and I'm finishing my coffee so that I can go and wrap some final presents and get ready for tomorrow. So let's take a look. Christmas Eve has never been part of the Feast of the 12 Days. In the English-speaking world, it is not specifically celebrated, except by the singing of carols and reading of lessons in King's College Chapel, Cambridge, by the excited anticipations of children everywhere, and by their parents leaving work early, having perhaps had rather more to drink at midday than is good for them, with much consequent manoeuvring for position under the mistletoe. On the continent of Europe, however, there are many rituals which in general take the form of variations on the St. Nicholas theme, the saint being replaced by impersonators of other beings. In Germany, there is the Christ child, the Christkind, a strange mystical fairy-like creature, often impersonated by a tall girl. Accompanying her, to admonish the wicked children, is the hideous Hans Trap. Then there is Nectaribut, a weird figure concerned with the adequacy of praying and competency in catechisms. He was once held to be a descendant of Odin, but now he is said to be a creation of the 17th century. Christmas Eve was also the occasion of the ceremonial bringing in of the Yule log. We have it in Herrick. Come, bring with a noise, my merry, merry boys, the Christmas log to the firing, while my good dame, she bids you all be free and drink to your heart's desiring. With the last year's brand, light the new block. lanterns were saved and were used to relight the Christmas fire the following year. The customs and ceremonies associated with this, now almost obsolete, the fire ceremony varied from country to country, but it once extended so far south as northern Italy. The Reverend Hilderic Friend mentions the Christmas Eve billet, which was common in France in mid-century. About 6 o'clock in the evening, an immense log was placed on the fire, and the burning of it was believed to keep away pestilence from all seated around it. The custom was taken to America in its English version by colonists. Let me have a bit of coffee. The burning of the Yule log was sometimes supplanted or replaced by the burning of a candle on Christmas Day. I lighted my wax candle, being Christmas Day, during tea time this afternoon, for about an hour. Recorded Paulson, Woodford, in 1790. In 1841, R.T. Hampson wrote, "In some places candles are made of a particular kind, because the candle that is lighted on Christmas Day must be so large as to burn from the time of its ignition to the close of the day. Otherwise it will portend evil to the family for the ensuing year." The poor were wont to present the rich with wax tapers, and Yule candles are still in the north of Scotland given by merchants to their customers. At one time, children at the village schools in Lancashire were required to bring each a mould candle before the parting or separation for the Christmas holidays. Today the flames of the Saturnalian tapers are reflected in the electric candles on our Christmas trees, and the ancient festival of fire in the burning brandy which surrounds the Christmas pudding. Christmas Eve has many supernatural associations which may be studied in books of folklore. It is often difficult to trace the connection with the Christmas season as such. One of them is vividly recalled in a passage by Hamlet, takes various forms, and is part of the complex folklore of cock-crow. The tradition being that Christ was born at cock-crow, and that before his birthday, cocks crow the whole night through. Horatio and Marcellus are talking. The ghost is present, and the crowing of a cock startles it. Marcellus observes that it faded on the crowing of the cock. He continues with the legend. Some say that ever against that season comes, wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. The bird of dawning singeth all night long, and then they say no spirit dares stir abroad. The nights are wholesome then, no planet strike, no fairy takes nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and so gracious is the time. Contrary to this was a belief held in many northern countries that wild, stormy spirits are abroad during the whole 12 days. Christmas Eve, like the eve of several other feasts, is a great time for auguries, particularly for maidens to preview their husbands. And on Christmas Eve, the Scandinavian trolls, though rarely seen by man, feast, dance, and revel. Okay, have a bit more coffee. Probably the most widely held superstition is that between 11 and 12 on Christmas Eve and the first hour of Christmas Day, the cattle kneel down in reverence, but any person who sees them dies within the year. This belief, which is clearly related to the traditional presence of cattle in the stable of Bethlehem, was held in parts of Wales well into the last century. Thomas Hardy knew of it, though apparently he was unaware of the ill consequences chances of eavesdropping. Christmas Eve and 12 of the clock. Now they are all on their knees. An elder said as we sat in a flock by the embers in hearthside ease. We pictured the meek mild creatures where they dwelt in their strawy pen, nor did it occur to one of us there to doubt they were kneeling then. So fair a fancy few would weave in those years, yet I feel if someone said on Christmas Eve, "Come, see the oxen kneel," in the lonely barton by yonder coombe, our children used to know, I should go with him in the gloom, hoping it might be so. Some versions of the legend hold that the animals also speak. In Switzerland it is recorded one Christmas Eve a peasant crept into the stable where his oxen were quietly chewing the hay set before them. Soon after the peasant had hidden himself, one of the oxen said to another, "We are going to have a hard and heavy task to do this week." "How is that?" asked another of the oxen. "The harvest is got in, and we have drawn home all the winter fuel." "That is so," was the reply, "but we shall have to drag a coffin to the churchyard, for our poor master will most certainly die this week." The peasant shrieked and fell back senseless. The ox's prophecy was fulfilled. Cattle apart, there are many opportunities for wishful thinking or apprehensive terrors in the mythology of Christmas Eve. When the Yule log burns, for instance, one should observe the shadows on the wall. Those shadows that appear headless belong to people who will die within the year. If one puts a small heap of salt on the table on Christmas Eve and it melts during the night, one will be dead in 12 months. If it remains dry and undiminished, one will live to a great age, and if a hoop falls off a cask on Christmas Eve, some member of the household is sure to die before the following Christmas. Spinsters make her to make the interesting experiment of pouring a ladleful of molten lead into cold water on Christmas Eve. When solidified, the lead will turn into the shape of the tools her future husband will use. A lancet-like shape if he is to be a doctor, a quill if he is to be a writer, a chain a surveyor, a mallet a mason, and so on. Another traditional belief is that if wet straw bands or hay bands are tied around the trunks of fruit trees on Christmas Eve, they will yield. Well, in the ensuing year, not presumably in anticipation of the modern practice of grease banding, until the latter part of the 19th century, parties and games were a regular feature of Christmas Eve, especially the game called Snapdragon, which had been a familiar sport throughout the 18th century. Here is a description of Snapdragon written as recently as the 1880s. A quantity of raisins are deposited in a large dish or bowl. The broader or shallower this is, the better, and brandy or some other spirit is poured over the fruit and ignited. The bystanders now endeavour, by turns, to grasp a raisin by plunging their hands through the flames, and as this is somewhat of an arduous feat, requiring both courage and rapidity of action, a considerable amount of merriment is evoked at the expense of the unsuccessful competitors. Whilst the sport of Snapdragon is going on, it is usual to extinguish all the lights in the room, so that the lurid glare from the snaps at all that comes, snatching at his feast of plums. Snip, snap, dragon. But old Christmas makes him come, though he looks so fee, far, fum. Snip, snap, dragon. Don't ye fear him, but be bold. Out he goes, his flames are cold. Snip, snap, dragon. Today all that remains of the traditional celebrations of the eve of Christmas is the hanging up of the children's stockings or putting out their shoes, the decoration of the Christmas tree, and the strategic suspension of holly and mistletoe. The harassed housewife of today probably performs some of these tasks on Christmas Eve merely because she has not had time to do them earlier. Traditionally, however, it was considered extremely unlucky to bring holly or mistletoe into a house before Christmas Eve. There is just one observance of Christmas Eve which, in country places in England at least, may possibly be gaining rather than losing ground. That is the ringing of church bells as summons to the midnight service, perhaps the most haunting and evocative expression of the significance of the day that is to come. An echo, albeit halting and confused, of such music as 'tis said before was never made, but when of old the sons of morning sung. I hope you all have a lovely Christmas day and a lovely time over the Christmas period. I shall be back with you very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody. This is Kate and the Library of Whispers, and it's coffee time. And today I'm going to read to you from this lovely vintage book, The 12 Days of Christmas by Miles and John Hadfield. This chapter is about St. Nicholas and Santa Claus. And here we see Santa Claus by Thomas Nast, a drawing for Hoppers Weekly circa 1865. Before we start, let's have a bit of coffee. It's very cold this week in the UK, especially where I live in the north, and we've had a little bit of snow. It's very cold. Today it's a bit damp. Okay. Old St. Nicholas comes so speedily over the frozen snow. Lots of eatables, lots of drinkables. Coming for me, I know. So ran the first verse of a song which we sang in our childhood. It was printed in an old picture book, probably a translation from the German. Opposite a vividly realistic illustration of the saint spinning along in a heavily laden sledge drawn by a team of reindeer. Who was this gift-giving saint, who in his modern manifestation as Father Christmas or Santa Claus dominates the modern mythology of Christmas Eve and Christmas daybreak? Very little is known of him. Nicholas of Patara was Bishop of Myra in Asia Minor during the 4th century. He was persecuted and imprisoned for his faith at the time of Diocletian, but he was not martyred. His piety had been shown in childhood when he fasted regularly on Wednesday Thursdays and Fridays. On the early death of his father and mother, he dedicated the rest of his life to the service of God. In pursuit of this, he made a journey to Palestine, and in his voyaging he miraculously stilled a storm at sea. Hence, in Eastern Europe, Italy, and among the Greeks, he is patron of sailors. His feast is celebrated on the anniversary of his death, the 6th of December. Elsewhere, St. Nicholas is held in repute for his generosity in saving the 3 daughters of a poor man from the life of shame to which he had condemned them because he could not afford dowries with which to endow husbands. St. Nicholas presented each daughter with a bar of gold, and all was well. This action is charmingly recorded in one wing of a triptych painted by Gerard David, 1460 to 1523, which shows the saint looking in through the window of the house, where the poor man sits disconsolately contemplating the fate of the 3 daughters lying innocently abed. And here is the picture on this side. Here is St. Nicholas looking in. This painting is in the National Gallery of Scotland. On account of this generous act, St. Nicholas is acknowledged in southern Europe as the patron of maidens. H.D. Inglis, when visiting Alicante in Spain in December 1830, amusingly described his functions. The day after my arrival in Alicante chanced to be an important dia de fiesta, for it was no less than the patron saint of the city, St. Nicholas, who is besides the peculiar patron of all young women who wish to be married. In the evening I went to the cathedral, which was illuminated and was filled with spectators, some seated upon mats, some standing, and in front of the altar an elevated platform was erected, upon which sat the governor and high civil and military officers. The saint stood in a niche in the centre of the altar, surrounded by lights. Above was an image of Christ, and below an image of the Virgin. After the performance of some selections of music, all the female part of the audience pressed forward towards the saint, for she who has the good fortune to see the saint with his eyes open will certainly be married the same year. There was much eagerness and much merriment among the ladies, and as I chanced to be in the current, I was carried in the same direction. I found that the merriment was owing to the difficulty of ascertaining what all were anxious to ascertain, for either the eyes of the saint or the lights were so contrived that it was impossible to determine whether his eyes were open or shut. Right, let's have a little bit of coffee before we carry on. This is a decaf coffee with oat milk, if you're interested. It's very nice. It's one of my favourites. The feast of St. Nicholas is, however, celebrated on its true day with greater splendour in the majestic church of Bari in southeastern Italy, where his remains, allegedly stolen from Myra, now lie. How is it that this patron of the seafarers and maidens of Mediterranean lands now appears with us in the north as St. Nicholas with his reindeer, alias Santa Claus, alias Father existed as a folk figure in the north of Europe. The Father Christmas, who was well known in medieval times, he appeared, for example, in the old Mummers plays, was quite a different figure from that which has been merged with the law of St. Nicholas. He was wholly pagan, more concerned with the adult significance of mistletoe and the Yule log than with gifts for children. This view of him long persisted. It is shown as lately as 1848 in a poem illustrated and presumably written by Alfred Crowquill. We know you ape the Christmas past, and totter in your gait, but that bright sparkle in your eye belies your bald old pate. You take us in, you sly old rogue, you always like your joke. You know you've got mistletoe in your capacious poke. What have you got within that bowl of odour, sweet and rare? Is it a potion like the last to wash away dull care, to turn the heart from feud and gall, and to drown the last year's strife, and shattered circles join again, that should endure for life? Then light the log of cheering blaze, we're waiting to a man, to sing the songs we've sung before, and pass the flowing can. See how the smile and friendly grasp are ready at your call, and lips are waiting to be pressed, one heart shall be for all. We know that you are not so old, you're full of youth and mirth. Where is the robe of white with which you mean to wed the earth? We'll at your wedding dance, in faith all friends so good and true, and welcome in the young new year so quickly born of you. The engraving that accompanies these rhymes shows a very different figure from the old gentleman we now see sitting in the stalls, disguised in a robe and white whiskers, distributing toys to the children after due prepayment. This pagan Father Christmas can be seen in paintings by Jordaens Metsu, Jan Steen, Grus and other artists from the 16th century onwards. It has been suggested that he is descended from Saturn. His mutability until well past the middle of the last century can be observed in illustrations to periodicals or early Christmas cards. Amongst the illustrations, for example, in George Budet's History of the Christmas Card, he sometimes takes the form of a small red-robed dwarf with a long-tailed hood of the Walt Disney School, sometimes of a majestic white-robed, white-bearded figure in a snow scene of Christmas trees. German. This is Jan Steen's custom with which St. Nicholas was concerned originally took place, and in some places still does, on the saint's properly appointed day, or its eve. It followed a form that is always basically the same, but has many local variations. Nicholas appeared with, or his visit was presaged by, the arrival of an assistant, usually a hideous person, but sometimes even Christ, St. Peter, an angel, or in Germany, Necht Ruprecht, the Christmas Eve figure. Inquiries are made about the behaviour of the little boys and girls in the household, whether they say their prayers, catechisms, and so on. St. Nicholas rewards the good ones with gifts, the bad ones are duly punished. A French strip of the last century, reproduced in part opposite, well illustrates the general trend of the legend. On the eve of St. Nicholas, Mammon hears a bell ringing down the street. Trelin, trelin, trelin. Excitedly she cries to her children, Entendez-vous la clochette de Saint-Foudard, le compagnon de Saint-Nicolas? Il va venir pour savoir, et vous avez été bien sage. Mettez-vous vite à genoux. In the next picture, with a courteous Bonjour, Madame, Saint Dickens' Christmas Carol as one of the trusted deeds of the modern Christmas. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a lustre of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles, his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away all, as dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and boring of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle Mrs. Church, an editorial writer, produced a reply which was published at Christmas for the next 50 years. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not to believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might catch up a bar to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that no children or men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive all the wonders there are, unseen or unseeable, in the world. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. So now you know. In 1914, the Santa Claus Association was formed by John D. Gluck of New York City to preserve children's faith in Santa Claus. This was effected by obtaining from the post office the mail addressed to Santa Claus and, when necessary, answering the letters and even sending presents. The latest addition to the Santa Claus legend, his red-nosed reindeer, Rudolph, arrived in 1939. This is diamond point engraving on glass, 1960. It is 5 equal circles of thickish, not too pliable wire, say 1 feet 9 inches in diameter, are bound together so that one becomes the horizontal equator, with the 4 others crossing at the poles to form 8 meridians, equally spaced. The frame is then wound with insulating tape to give a rougher surface for binding on the evergreen, preferably box, which will thickly cover it all over. In the exact centre, 7 red apples hang on red ribbons, taken right through the core with a bodkin, and knotted below if the stalks are gone. 8 red candles are clipped in the spaces round the equator. Another 8 rise from the meridians, halfway towards the bottom. Permanent candle holders for these are fastened to the frame. They are shaped by twisting the free end of each sharp piece of wire round the end of a pencil. Finally, the device is hung up on red cords, perhaps, and the mistletoe is tied beneath. Although mistletoe abounds in the western, southwestern, and a few other parts of Britain, many tons are imported annually from France, mostly cut in Brittany. In Australia, except Tasmania, the local form of mistletoe is so abundant as to be a dangerous forest weed. It is not there used for decoration. If the spiritual qualities of mistletoe are rather dubious, holly or home, whose symbolic antecedents were equally pagan, has become entirely respectable. In Restoration times, John Evelyn, who loved this incomparable tree above all evergreens, was puzzled why the ancient writer Macrobius included it among unfortunate plants, but he goes on to recall that other writers put it among the lucky, for so it seems they used to send branches of it as well as of oak, the most fortunate according to the Gentile theology, with their strenae, New Year's gifts, begun as Symmachus tells us, by K. Tatius, almost as old as Rome herself. But to say no more of these superstitious fopperies, which are many other, about this tree, we still dress up both our churches and houses on Christmas and other festival days with its cheerful green and rutilant berries. Since the days of superstitious fopperies, holly has attracted to itself much Christian lore, and as the red berries connect it with the Passion, it is known in Scandinavian countries as Christ thorn. Once holly was held to be in opposition to the ivy. A reason given for this was that the holly belonged to the Christian home and church, the bacchanalian ivy to the inn. Another explanation was that the holly was male and sturdy, the ivy female and clinging. Another type of tree, sometimes but not always connected with Christmas, has its legendary origin in the staff of a saint, which, stuck into the ground by its bearer in a moment of despair, burgeoned and flowered. The most famous of such miraculous trees is the Glastonbury thorn. The legend is that when Joseph of Arimathea came to Britain, bringing with him the Christian faith, he landed on the Isle of Avalon, famed in the Arthurian legend. The old man, fatigued with the climb up a steep hill and no doubt depressed by the trying prospect of converting the natives, plunged his staff into the ground. The day was Christmas Eve. Suddenly the staff, which was of hawthorn, broke was a sign of encouragement to Joseph and to all those who beheld it, of the miraculous power of his faith. When Glastonbury Abbey was built nearby, the thorn, now rooted, was transferred within its precincts. Dean Armitage Robinson, the great authority on Glastonbury, has unearthed the first record of the thorn, which do burge and bear green leaves at Christmas, and groweth in Werrell. This was written about 1502. The hill which Joseph is reputed to have climbed is still known as Werrell Hill. In 1613, Michael Drayton wrote of the 3 times famous Isle of Glastonbury, famed for Great Arthur's tomb, Holy Joseph's grave, and where trees yet in winter bloom and bear their summer's green. Not until 1635, with the visit of Sir William Brereton, do we get a full and first-hand account of the tree, so famous and so much visited and frequented on the day of Christ's Nativity. It then grew half a mile from Glastonbury. Sir William collected branches and leaves and carved his initials on the trunk, at the same time observing that the tree was in a bad way, because his many predecessors had done likewise. He censured the local inhabitants for not taking proper care of it. A number of crafts had at diverse times been taken, one forming a notable tree at a tavern near the George, whereof also I brought away with me some branches. In the same year, Lieutenant Hammond of Norwich inspected the thorn and also the one at the tavern, which, after a glass of good sack, he reported as springing and flourishing when he passed on his way. About the same time we hear something of the dire effects of cutting this holy tree. James Howell, in his curious tract, Dodona's Grove, or the Vocal Forest, considered that he was well served of his blind seal, who, going to cut down an ancient white hawthorn tree, which because she budded before others might be an occasion of superstition, had some of the prickles flew into his eye and made him monocular. John Parkinson in 1640 refers to Spina acuta by Flora Britannica, England's hawthorn. He tells us that this grows in diverse places in our land, where it is not greatly wondered at by those who live there. He names trees at Glastonbury Abbey, at High Street or Way Street in Romney Marsh, and near Nantwich in Cheshire. In 1646, Sir Thomas Brown pointed out that precociousness is known in many trees other than the Glastonbury thorn, and strange effects are naturally taken for miracles by weaker heads. He adds, such a thorn there is in Boreham Park, Suffolk, and elsewhere. That industrious Victorian authoress Agnes Strickland unearthed in France an account of a Christmas spent at the court of Charles II by Pierre Cyprien Gamache in 1660. Christmas, he tells us, is always celebrated in England with greater pomp than in any other European realm. Flowers of the Glastonbury thorn, which usually flowers on Christmas Eve, are brought up in procession on Christmas morning and presented to the King and Queen. This thorn, says Father Gamache, was much venerated by the English, who told him that St. Joseph of Arimathea brought to Glastonbury a thorn out of our Lord's crown and placed it in the earth. Thenceforth it blossomed on Christmas Day. In more recent times, the most interesting development is the spreading of this cult, while still maintained at Glastonbury, to Herefordshire. In the mid-19th century, there appear to have been Christmas tree, however, let us spare a word for rosemary, which was given pride of place by all writers on Christmas decorations from the 14th to the middle of the 19th century, but is now sadly neglected. To the generally beneficent qualities of rosemary, herbalists testify from ancient days onwards. Particularly, it is Shakespeare's rosemary that's for remembrance, and a herb that keeps seeing and savour all the winter long. As for rosemarine, wrote that ardent gardener Sir Thomas More, I let it run all over my garden walls, not only because my bees love it, but because it is the herb sacred to remembrance, and therefore to friendship. Today, however, perhaps because it is not everywhere a hardy plant, rosemary is seldom to be seen among Christmas decorations. And the boar's head, which is used to beautify, it is even more out of fashion. One herb that was once famous is now even more forgotten than rosemary. In the 17th century it was described very frankly by Sir Thomas Browne. The rose of Jericho, that flourishes every year just about Christmas Eve, is famous in Christian reports, which, notwithstanding, we have some reason to doubt, and are plainly informed by Polonius, it is but a monastical imposture, as he hath delivered in his observations concerning the plants in Jericho. That which promoted the conceit, or perhaps begot its continuance, was a propriety in this plant. For though it be dry, yet will it upon imbibition of moisture dilate its leaves, and explicate its flowers, contracted and seemingly dried up. And this is to be effected not only in the plant yet growing, but in some manner also in that which is brought execucious and dry unto us. Which quality being observed, the subtlety of contrivers did commonly play this shew upon the eve of our Saviour's nativity, when by drying the plant again, disclosed the next day, and so pretended a double mystery, referring unto the opening and closing of the womb of Mary. The botanists are even more succinct, describing this miraculous rose as a small annual cruciferous plant, native of Western Asia and northeastern Africa, whose dried fronds unfurl under the influence of moisture. The original Christmas tree, it is charmingly said, was devised by Martin Luther in the early days of the 16th century. One Christmas Eve he was walking under a brilliant starlit sky. The snowy, frosted fir trees sparkled in the moonlight. His thoughts turned to the nativity. Coming back to his home, he tried with a sapling to reconstruct the scene, representing the starlight with candles. Considering the Christmas tree more factually, the use of the fir Tannenbaum seems to have originated in the winter solstice celebrations of the pagan German tribes in the Black Forest. It was well and widely established by Martin Luther's time. Probably not until the end of the 17th century did it carry lights. The custom was essentially a German one, spreading through the fur-clad Scandinavian countries and reaching America, when Hessian soldiers were engaged in the Revolution. Indeed, there is evidence of a Christmas tree being in use by German settlers in Pennsylvania as early as 1746. It may come as a surprise to English readers to know that the cult of the Christmas tree was familiar in the United States before it was known in much of Europe. It spread to France from Germany in the early 19th century. German merchants and court officials task is supported at the root by piles of sweets of a larger kind, and by toys and dolls of all descriptions, suited to the youthful fancy and to the several ages of the interesting scions of royalty, for whose gratification they are displayed. The trees are constructed and arranged by Mr. Mordell, the Queen's confectioner. The Christmas tree, erected and embellished in the manner of the British royal household, spread rapidly over the fast developing British Empire, and was introduced to scenes and climes incongruously different from the dark Rhenish forests whence it came. The spruce fir is not a native of the British Isles, but has long been cultivated for its timber. The demand for Christmas trees became so great that young trees were imported from the continent in large numbers. With the emergence of British commercial forestry early in the present century, the cultivation of spruce trees, especially for the purpose, quite a difficult undertaking, became a profitable sideline. Their production now is on a vast scale. Though in Europe the spruce fir is universally used, this tree is not grown in the land where the cult of the Christmas tree is now at its most extravagant, the United States. The rich and varied silver of the North American continent is, however, reflected in a like variety of Christmas trees. Several kinds of conifer are used, and one, the Douglas fir, provided the biggest Christmas tree on record. And then it says it might now have been exceeded. I'm sure it has. Set up by the Northgate community, a shopping centre near Seattle, Washington, it stood 212 feet high and weighed 25 tons. At Hilton Park, Wilmington, NC, an ancient though very living oak provides a permanent Christmas tree. At the Dew season it displays 7,000 coloured lights, and from its boughs are draped 6 tons of Spanish moss. The White House has a national living Christmas tree, its illuminations lit each year by the President. And there's a black and white photo of it there. In other lands too, trees of varying kinds are known as Christmas trees. New Zealand has one that goes under that name because of the red flowers which open in December and January. Its native name is Pohutagawa. In exposed places it assumes a fantastic shape like a Japanese bonsai. The decoration of the Christmas tree has changed radically from its early form in one respect only. Electric lights of all colours have superseded the guttering and sometimes rather alarming candle flames. Toys, of course, are still toys, though their nature changes from year to year. A delightful custom increasingly in favour it is to display the illumined tree in a window facing the street. The Christmas rose is a true Christmas flower, though it is also nest of long, serrated green, environing leaves, while like a birch listens and looks out. See now at twilight how her pale presence, even between sundown and dawning star, fills the dusk with quickness, quiet as prayer. It has always been the general custom that decorations be removed after Epiphany. Some people, however, have held that they should remain until the eve of the purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary, or Candlemas, which falls on the 2nd of February. Such a belief was long held in Shropshire, where the holly and ivy, on being taken down, were replaced by snowdrops, the Candlemas bells. The different forms that Christmas church decorations have taken are no doubt haphazard, even if traditional. This was not good enough for the systematic Victorians, and in 1859 the Reverend Edward L. Cutts, B.A., put this sad state of affairs right by the publication of a vigorous yet tactful essay on the Christmas decoration of churches. It was obviously written to counteract a not insignificant feeling against the relics of paganism. He was careful to point out and emphasise the frequent use of foliage in Gothic church sculpture. After detailing the virtues and decorative possibilities of holly, ivy, laurel, yew, arbor vitae, myrtle and box, Mr. Cutts continues, "Shall we use flowers in our decorations? There are a great number of excellent persons who like to see the church decorated with the customary Christmas greenery, but have a horror of the introduction of flowers. It is a novelty, and they suspect all novelties. The fact remains that reason or no reason, there are a considerable number of excellent and worthy persons who will admit that there is no abstract objection to the introduction of a few flowers among the decorations. They even think there will be something poetical and beautiful in putting a great bouquet upon the communion table. If there were no superstitious intention in it, but in these days of change they are afraid of every novelty. They fear lest too much regard be had to these things, in themselves innocent. They fear the gradual and insidious return of superstitious practices. They fear a serpent lying hid among your flowers. Take care, dear decorators, that you do not give good reason for such fears." From early times, for example in the Italian presepio, artificial as opposed to living materials were used in decoration. With the increased popularity of the Christmas tree, their production became professional. A large trade developed in angels, fairies, flags, fragile glass ornaments of dazzling colours and curious shapes, glittering stars and soft streamers of tinsel, netted bags of sweetmeats, and strings of American popcorn blown up from maize. One of the latest accessories to be invented was the now universal Christmas cracker. It seems that it originated in a French device, a bag of bonbons enclosed in a paper covering that must be tugged hard by two children before it burst open to release the contents. The French were at first the master makers of these novelties. We have failed to find any evidence of the existence of the modern explosive cracker before 1860, but it seems that about that time an English firm adopted the French device and added a minute explosion at the moment the two parts split asunder. Fancy paper hats, mottos, and a myriad of small toys have subsequently been enclosed within increasingly elaborate, decorated and expensive crackers. By 1900, cracker making had become a minor industry, as we can read in the New Penny magazine of that year. 15 floors, most of them 100 feet long and 25 feet wide, and all of them given up to sweets Christmas decorations. Next we'll read gifts and remembrances. I hope you enjoyed that little history. This has been Kate at the Library Whispers saying I shall see you very, very soon. Bye bye for now. Bye bye. Hello everybody. This is Kate at the Library of Whispers. And this is my woodwick candle. Today we're going to look at this vintage book, The 12 Days of Christmas by Miles and John Hadfield. It's got a very lovely, colourful cover. And this is the spine. Let's take a look inside. It says, the first day of Christmas, my true love sent me a partridge in a pear tree. And so the old song runs on through all its 12 verses. But how many of us know the significance of the 12 days on which such a curious selection of gifts was presented to a loved one? The linking of the pagan celebrations of the passing of the winter solstice with the greatest Christian festival has bequeathed to us a festive season that incorporates a strange medley of pagan and Christian customs. The spiritual element of Christmas still inspires all branches of the Christian faith, and the more mundane element is still expressed by the simple traditions of good friendship, good feeding, and good drinking. What do we have inside? Here is a picture of the first Christmas card, designed by J.C. Horsley, 1843. And on this side we have a stained glass window. The Adoration of the Shepherds at East Halling, Norfolk, 15th century. Now let me see. So this book was published in 1961, and I found it in a local charity shop during the summer, and I thought it might be a nice book for us to look through at this time of year. So it has an introduction, and the contents are From Saturn to Scrooge, Evergreen Thoughts, Gifts and Remembrances, The Feast, Christmas Eve, St. Nicholas and Santa Claus, Christmas Day, Carols and Christmas Songs, Christmas Remembered, Boxing Day, From the 2nd day to the 5th, Hogmanay, New Year's Day, From the 8th day to the 10th, the Eve of the Epiphany, and the 12th day. Then we have a list of the circumstances of its reiterated celebration come to regard the occasion as a wintry one. The announcing angels appear in a star-bright wintry sky to shepherds crouching under frozen hedges. Later, the Magi make their journey through the rigours of cold. For us, the setting is Milton's. It was the winter wild, while the heaven-born child, all meanly wrapped in the rude manger lies. Nature in awe to him hath doffed her gaudy trim with her great master, so to sympathise. It was no season then for her to wanton with the sun, her lusty paramour. Medieval artists, with their more fertile imaginations, as often as not, set their scene in spring or early summer, with white sheep in green pastures under clear blue skies. The historical circumstances of the Nativity and its celebrations in early times are subjects upon which, during 19 centuries, much has been written that is conjectural and fanciful, less, but still plenty, that is scholarly and factual. It seems reasonable to take the view that the early church, wishing to commemorate the birth of a Saviour and a new faith, turned to those pagan festivities of ancient origin connected with the passing of the winter solstice and moulded them to new service. There was a suitable festival ready to the hands of the Roman fathers of the Christian Church, the Saturnalia. Saturn and his wife, Ops, were amongst the oldest deities of ancient Italy. Saturn, the god of agriculture, is said to have had an altar at the foot of the Capitol before Rome was founded. One account has it that when he was deposed from his throne by Jupiter, he wandered to Italy, where he ruled as king in the Golden Age. In Rome he was welcomed by another ancient god, Janus, who lends his name to the month of January, and settled at the foot of the Capitol. Eventually, Saturn vanished from the earth, leaving behind him a reputation for cleverness and for devouring his sons on birth, to fulfill a pledge that he would not produce a male heir. A temple was built in his honour, where his image stood, tethered by woolen bands around the feet to prevent the deity's departure. Subsequently, the Saturnalia, the great festival in his honour, was celebrated on the 19th, and after Caesar's reform of the calendar, on the 17th of December. Later, Augustus decreed that the 17th should be sacred to Saturn and the 19th to Ops. Henceforward it appears that the 17th and 18th were devoted to the Saturnalia, and the 2 following days to the Opalia, a festival of Ops. Caligula added a 5th day, the Day of Youth, devoted to sports of the young. But in popular usage the festival lasted 7 days. The season was one of general joy and mirth. The woolen fetters were taken from the image of Saturn, and each man offered a pig as sacrifice. During the festival, schools were closed, no war was declared or battle fought, no punishment was inflicted. In place of the toga, an undress garment was worn. Distinctions of rank were laid aside. Slaves sat at table with their masters, or were actually waited upon by them. A reversal of roles, which later had its parallel in Christmas festivities. Gambling with dice, at other times prohibited, was now permitted and practised. All classes exchanged gifts, the commonest being wax tapers and dolls. Scandinavian celebration. The word is found in Old English and the Teutonic, but its ultimate origin is obscure. The name Christmas and the Dutch Kerstmis are self-explanatory and comparatively modern, nor is there any great mystery in the German Weihnacht, Sacred Night and its forms, the French Noël, Italian Natale, Welsh Nadlig and Gaelic Nalak may all be related and of pre-Christian origin, connected with the birth of the new year. Many naively ingenious suggestions have been put forward for the selection of the 25th of December for the festival. One is based on the tradition that Christ's Passion occurred on the 25th of March. The same date was chosen for his conception, so that the years of his life might be complete. Go forward 9 months, and we come to the 25th of December as his birthday. One school of early chronologists, by means of obscurely fantastic calculations based on the scriptures, fixed the birthday to coincide with the day of celebration of the vernal equinox, also the 25th of March, in the Julian calendar. This reasoning connected to the incarnation with the creation. Later, when the incarnation came to be viewed as beginning at the conception instead of the birth would automatically be placed 9 months later. More probably, the choice of the 25th of December had some connection with the feast of the sun god on the day of the winter solstice, the 25th of December in the Julian calendar. With the sun god was identified Mithras, that most powerful of Persian gods, who in the centuries immediately following the birth of Christ was adopted officially by the Romans, and whose cult came near to eclipsing Christianity. It seems that the early Christians fought a battle for possession of his day, and won. We may leave these conjectures and disputations to our modern wise men, though first it would be well to recall an alteration in the calendar that has taken place, piecemeal, country by country, over a spell of 2 centuries. The Julian calendar was replaced by the Gregorian system. The result is that the original Christmas Day was what is now the 6th of January. It seems that the first celebration of the Feast of the Nativity took place in Rome about or just before the year 350. The vitality of the early Christian faith was such that it dominated and took under its wing many pagan rites, which we now regard as essentially Christian characteristics of the 12 days of Christmas. The giving of presents, the lighting of fires and candles, the decoration of houses with evergreen and berried branches, the topsy-turvydom of masters waiting upon servants, and the frolics of the Lord of Misrule, the suspension of enmity and the proclamation of peace. The message of peace and goodwill and hope of salvation for mankind has already been expressed by Virgil some 40 years before the Nativity. This translation is Dryden's. The last great age, foretold by sacred rhymes, renews its finished course. Saturnian times roll round again, and mighty years begun from their first orb in radiant circles run. The base, degenerate iron offspring ends, a golden progeny from heaven descends. O chaste Lucina, speed the mother's pains and haste the glorious birth. Thy own Apollo reigns. The lovely boy with his auspicious face shall Polio's consulship and triumph grace. Majestic months set out with him to their appointed race. The far follows. See, the jarring nations he in peace shall bind, and with paternal virtues rule mankind. On bidden earth shall wreathing ivy bring, and fragrant herbs the promises of spring, as her first offerings to her infant king. The close and complex interweaving of pagan and Christian traditions was well described by Sir Arthur Evans after he had spent Christmas in a small town above the Adriatic, in what was then the Black Mountain, Montenegro. The elaborate celebration of the Christian occasion was grafted onto an earlier cult of ancestor worship, and, he pointed out, some of the customs were surprisingly similar to those of the English described in Herrick's poems in the 17th century. The Saturnalian custom of reversal of ranks, of the master waiting on his slave, and so on, survived in the Feast of Fools, the boy bishops, and, until Tudor times, in the Lords of Misrule. It was, however, by its nature not a custom of the common people, and so had not enough popular support to survive the attacks of the Puritans, who considered the custom obnoxiously pagan. Perhaps, however, a hint of it was carried on into the pantomime, whose theme is so often that of the poor boy or the underling finally triumph over malevolent superiors. It possibly continued also in the hunting and killing of the wren, the king of birds, who was for one day deposed. Fire in the form of Christmas candles, and the tradition, if today not the fact, of the Yule log from the north is still with us. The entertainment of friends at the Saturnalia lives on with virility in the Christmas party, though strangely the ancient habit of entertainment at the end of the 12 days, which continued into the 19th century, has almost died out, as has much else connected with Epiphany, except in the Eastern Church, where it still holds an important place. The Roman practice of celebrating Christmas on the 25th of December as a festival of the Nativity alone spread gradually throughout the churches. In about 380 it was adopted at Constantinople. The Armenian Church, however, still does not acknowledge it. In 567 the Council of Tours declared the 12 days, from Christmas to Epiphany, a festal tide. In Germany Christmas was established in 813, and in Norway by King Hakon the Good in the middle of the 10th century. To England, Sir E.K. Chambers tells us, Christmas came, if not with the Celtic Church, at least with St. Augustine in 592. On Christmas Day, 598, more than 10,000 English converts were baptised, and by the time of Bede, who died in 734, Christmas was established, with Epiphany and Easter as one of the 3 leading festivals of the year. The laws of Ethelred, 991 to 1016, and of Edward the Confessor, ordained it a holy tide of peace and concord. As elsewhere, there was soon a shift to the Christmas feast of Germano-Celtic pagan folk customs, disapproved by the Church, which had formerly been celebrated on the adjacent days on either side of it. In medieval times, the most notable development of the religious aspects of the Church ceremonial took place in the country of its origin, Italy. Most important was the introduction of the presepio, in English, the crib, in France, crèche, in Germany, crib. Its origin is attributed to St. Francis of Assisi in 1224. The circumstances were recorded by Saint Bonaventura in his life of the saint. Francis the Levite of Christ, chanting the Holy Gospel. Then he preached unto the folk standing around the birth of the King in poverty, calling him, when he wished to name him, the Child of Bethlehem, by reason of his tender love for him. A certain knight, valorous and true, Messer John of Greccio, and for the love of Christ had left the secular army, and was bound by closest friendship unto the man of God, declared that he beheld a little child, right fair to see sleeping in that manger, who seemed to be awakened from sleep when the blessed Father Francis embraced him in both arms. The warm humanity of this reconstruction of the Nativity, in the form of an almost magical toy-like model, must have been a power in attracting to the unsophisticated from pagan customs towards the Roman Church. The appeal of the doll, one recalls the Saturnalia, is universal. The most celebrated representation of the Christ child in this form is the Bambino of the Church of St. Maria in Aracoli, on the Capitol Hill in Rome, an ancient relic of miraculous origin to whom gifts and missives are sent in thousands from all over the world. Naples also, in the 18th century, was a great centre of the cult of the crib. The Bourbon, Charles III and his queen set the whole court to work on the making of cribs, and one was assembled in almost every room of the palace. In Germany, the crib became a cradle that could be rocked by the devout, the Kindelweigen. The worshippers thus took an exciting physical part in their devotions. The custom has in recent years spread to churches of practically every denomination, and to some commercial establishments as well. The present figure of the tradition in Italy was recently described by a correspondent of the Times. This is the time when most Italian families are unpacking the Christmas crib to see which figures need repair or replacement. Modern mass production means the loss of some of the old skills in making the figures, but this does not seem an excessive price to pay by comparison with what is happening to Christmas elsewhere. West Germans, for instance, are reported in the press here to be hanging industrial shares on their Christmas trees this year. The crib has shown an adaptability over the centuries which has allowed it to keep pace with changes of fashion and to include technological developments. Purists among the supporters of the crib are at pains to keep public taste within bounds. The National Association, formed several years ago for this purpose, draws the line, for example, at camels too large for the figures and at palm trees sprinkled with imitation snow, and insists that Christmas trees should be kept well away from the manger. This purism nevertheless encourages ingenious elaborations of the crib scene. The association's journal provides hints on how to make such diverting additions as real miniature waterfalls. Indeed, the sort of parents who look forward to the time when they can buy their children a model railway set can find much the same sort of enjoyment in a crib. With a certain amount of ingenuity, illuminated stars are made to rise and fall, angels to fly, and fountains to spurt real water, which runs under bridges and turns wheels. Once the enthusiast has gone beyond the Holy Family, the three kings, the ox and the donkey, the field is open. Elephants have put in an appearance, though they have not yet become generally accepted. Common farmyard animals are part of the scene, as are shepherds with bagpipes, blacksmiths, innkeepers, log sawers, water carriers and wayside sellers of bread and Neapolitan pizza, all set in a Bethlehem closely resembling an Italian hill village. Christmas ritual, ceremony, and customs so richly used and developed by the Roman Church was dealt a blow with the coming of the Reformation in 1517. The Reformation, however, does not seem to have seriously affected British customs, which continued with vigour in Tudor times, but the Puritans disapproved, and in the time of Cromwell, the celebration of the Nativity, even in the churches, was prohibited, if, as recounted by John Evelyn, sometimes ineffectually. The general air of spiritual gloom, as distinct from physical hardship, that had enshrouded the early American settlers at Christmas can be gathered from William Bradford's journal for the year. Okay, before I read that, let's take a look at these pictures. So the top one is Twelfth Night, and the bottom, Christmas Campbell's or a Kiss Under the Mistletoe. So this one is from 1794, and this one too. Okay, let's read this. On the day called Christmas Day, the governor called them out to work, as was used. But the most of the new company excused themselves and said it went against their consciences to work on the day. So the governor told them that if they made it a matter of conscience, he would spare them until they were better informed. So he led away the rest and left them, but when they came home at noon from their work, he found them in the street at play. Christmas Day, which had formerly been celebrated on what is now the 6th of January, was put back. The Gentleman's Magazine in 1753 published the following reports. Quainton, in Buckinghamshire, December 24th. Above 2,000 came here this night, with lanterns and candles, to view a blackthorn which grows in this neighbourhood, and which was remembered this year only to be a slip from the famous Glastonbury thorn that is always budded on the 24th, and was full blown the next day, and went all off at night, but the people finding no appearance of a bud, 'twas agreed by all that December 25, N.S., could not be the right Christmas Day, and as accordingly refused going to church and treating their friends on that day as usual, at length the affair became so serious that the ministers of the neighbouring villages, in order to appease the people, thought it prudent to give notice that the old Christmas Day should be kept holy as before. Glastonbury. A vast concourse of people attended the noted thorns on Christmas Eve, new style, but to their great disappointment there was no appearance of its blowing, which made them watch it till the 5th of January, the Christmas Day old style, when it blowed as usual. At the end of the 18th and early in the 19th century, the antiquarians were becoming interested in old Christmas. William Hone, for example, during the 1830s wrote with enthusiasm of the customs still surviving in Wales, which were later described more fully by Marie Trevelyan. In the old days, Christmastide festivities extended into several weeks. Preparations for burning the Christmas log and for the various feasts were extensive and elaborate. Then the bards and the musicians of the principality were active, and many kinds of amusements and entertainments were arranged. Nearly all the old Christmas customs have become obsolete, but the singing and literary festivals still remain in the form of local estiviad. The old-time revelry has vanished, and with it the bringing in of the Christmas log, the quaint morris or merry dancers, with the adern pig lewid or bird with the grey beak, the Mary Lwyd or Holy Mary, and the waysailing amusements and festivals in connection with the New Year and Twelfth Night or Old Christmas Day. In Wales, burning torches were greatly in evidence with the Christmas log. The interest of the antiquarians spread to the expanding middle classes, that their ideas of celebration were more refined than those of their forebears is indicated by William Harrison's The Humorist of 1832. Thrice welcome, Christmas, maugre thine approach, be marked by skies somewhat too cold and murky. I hail thy harbinger, the Norwich coach, laden inside and out, with chine and turkey and sausage by the fathom. Where is Snapdragon, all extinguished, vanished, where mystic mistletoe, unfairly banished, to grace the kitchen, and I live to tell it, where blind man's buff, alas, this march of mind, with all its boasted blessings, hath refined us out of half our former recreations. Where is old Hunt the Slipper, with the snow which melted many, many years ago, where forfeits paid, I hate alliterations, in cunning Cupid's current coinage, kisses, dispatched to Coventry, to modern misses? Where are the Coventry dancers, once promoted to such distinction in our revels, voted, old-fashioned as the laird of Batmawapple, cast off, Busset, the modish belle derides, as figure famous masters of the engraved woodblock who practised their art in the pages of Punch, the Illustrated London News, and other now forgotten periodicals brought into visual being a new Christmas world. But it was the Queen herself who lit the lights of the new Christmas. When she married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg, he brought with him a wealth of German Christmas lore, which the royal family practised with enthusiasm. If they were not quite the first Christmas trees in England, those at Windsor Castle set an example which rapidly spread throughout the British Isles. The panegyrists and practitioners of Christmas customs in Britain in the early 19th century soon spread the cult farther afield. Christmas became widely celebrated in the Antipodes, where the sun is at its height at Christmas time. This change of climate was at first difficult to accept. Douglas Sladen, in A Christmas Letter from Australia, wrote, "It is not quite Christmas here, with this unclouded sky, this pure transparent atmosphere, this sun mid-heaven high, to see the rose upon the bush, young leaves upon the trees, and hear the forest's summer hush, or the low hum of bees." The early Dutch settlers in New York had observed the Christmas season, particularly St. Nicholas's Day on the 6th of December, but the increasing preponderance of English settlers shifted the emphasis to 25th of December. James H. Barnett summarised the position up to about 1750 thus: "The communities in which Roman Catholics, Episcopalians and Dutch Reformed colonists were in the ascendancy celebrated Christmas, whereas where the Quakers, Baptists, Congregationalists and Presbyterians were dominant, Christmas festivities were denigrated. Yet the element among the early settlers that pitched the bar in Bradford's time persisted, and all the English traditional customs were in existence in America, often in a somewhat hole-and-corner manner from the earliest times. Christmas customs were introduced also by the English and Hessian soldiers during the Revolutionary War. According to some historians, the Hessians were celebrating Christmas too well in 1776, when, on the night of the 25th of December, General George Washington crossed the Delaware River and was thus able to surprise and defeat the garrison stationed at Trenton, New Jersey. During the early 19th century, both the religious and the secular celebrations spread in America. Carols and Christmas hymns were more generally sung, though the giving of Christmas presents other than charity towards the less fortunate was unusual until much later in the century. In the 1850s there still remained religious opposition from the puritanical organisations whose churches were closed on the 25th of December. However, the Roman Catholic and other celebrating sects had for some time opened their churches, which were decked with evergreens, a custom brought from England. Even in the 1830s, advertisements which appeared in journals in some of the larger American cities mentioned Christmas. The publication of Washington Irving's English Christmas Studies, Dickens' Sketches by Boz, Pickwick Papers, and particularly A Christmas Carol in 1843, was influential in popularising the old-fashioned Christmas with the people of North America as in Britain, and about this time the Americans took the Dutch Santa Claus to their hearts and built him up to a great folk figure. The legal recognition of Christmas Day as a holiday in America was initiated by the state of Alabama in 1836. The last state to accept it was Oklahoma in 1890, though the majority of states had done so 10 years before. The influence of Dickens and the of Santa Claus upon the American people in the 19th century is illustrated by the story of the child who, when told of Dickens' death, asked, "Will Father Christmas die too?" I hope you enjoyed that. I thought that was quite interesting. Next time we'll do the next chapter, Evergreen Thoughts, which is about decorations. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers saying